The rain was relentless that evening, a cold and unwelcoming curtain that blurred the horizon and soaked through everything it touched. Thomas gripped the steering wheel tighter, squinting through the wipers as they fought to keep up with the storm. The rhythmic thump of rubber against glass was the only sound breaking the silence inside his old pickup truck. In the back seat, his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, slept with her head resting against a worn-out teddy bear. Her small face was peaceful, unaware of how heavy her father's world had become. Thomas wasn't just tired. He was exhausted in ways sleep couldn't fix. 2 years had passed since his wife's sudden passing, and though time was supposed to heal, it had only taught him how to hide the cracks. Between working double shifts as a mechanic and trying to keep up with bills, every day was survival. But even in the exhaustion, he never complained. He couldn't, because every time he looked at Lily, he saw the reason he kept going. As thunder rolled across the sky, a flash of movement caught his attention. A white car was pulled over by the roadside, hazard lights blinking weakly through the sheets of rain. A woman stood beside it, soaked, struggling to hold her coat above her head while staring helplessly at the open hood. Thomas slowed down instinctively. Something in his gut told him to stop. He could have kept driving. Most people would have. It was raining hard, the road was slick, and he had his daughter to think about. But kindness wasn't something he switched off when life got tough. So he pulled over. If you believe that kindness still matters, that a simple act can change a life, take a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it today. Because what happens next proves that no good deed ever goes unnoticed. Thomas stepped out into the storm, pulling his jacket tighter. The rain hit him like needles, but he walked straight toward the stranded woman. She turned, startled at first, then relieved. Her car, an older model, had smoke rising from under the hood, a sure sign of overheating. She looked like she'd been standing there for a while. Her clothes were soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, but even through the rain and chaos, there was something fragile yet strong about her presence. She explained that her car had suddenly stopped working and her phone had died. She had no way to call for help. Thomas nodded and went to work without hesitation. He had tools in his truck, he always did. Within minutes, he'd figured out the problem, a broken radiator hose. Not something easily fixed in the middle of a storm, but he managed a temporary patch to get her to the nearest service station. She thanked him over and over, her voice trembling, her eyes glistening with something more than just rain. When he asked where she was headed, she hesitated. Nowhere, really, she finally admitted. I was just driving. There was a sadness in her tone, something that struck a chord deep inside him. He offered to drive her to town, and she accepted. Inside the truck, the air was filled with the soft hum of the heater and the steady breathing of his daughter. The woman introduced herself as Emily. She worked as an illustrator, though lately, she said, work had been scarce. She'd lost her apartment a week ago and was trying to figure out her next move. She smiled faintly when she looked at Lily, saying she reminded her of her younger sister who had passed years ago. Thomas didn't pry. He knew pain when he saw it. And he also knew that sometimes, all a person needed was a little kindness without questions. They reached a small diner by the highway. Thomas insisted she come in for a hot meal. She protested at first, saying she couldn't let him spend his money on her, but he simply smiled and said, "Don't worry about it. You do the same." And somehow, she believed he was right. Over steaming coffee and pancakes, they talked. About life. About loss. About dreams that had been put on hold. For the first time in years, Thomas found himself laughing. Genuinely laughing. At her sarcastic humor and the way she described life with an artist's poetic chaos. And Emily, in turn, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. When the rain eased, Thomas offered to drop her off at a motel. But when they arrived, the clerk told them there were no vacancies. A power outage had forced them to close some rooms. Without thinking twice, Thomas said, "You can stay at my place tonight. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry." Emily hesitated, looking torn between gratitude and pride. But exhaustion won. She agreed. That night, in Thomas's small home, something subtle yet profound happened. Emily helped him clean up the kitchen after dinner, humming softly as she worked. Lily, ever curious, showed her drawings she'd made, messy crayon sketches of fairies, cars, and rainbows. Emily's eyes lit up. "You're really talented," she told her gently, and Lily beamed. Thomas stood by the doorway watching them, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. Days turned into weeks. What was supposed to be one night stretched into a longer stay. Emily began helping around the house, cooking, cleaning, even walking Lily to school when Thomas had early shifts. She'd sit with Lily in the evenings, teaching her how to draw, how to see stories in colors and shapes. The house, once quiet and heavy with silence, now echoed with laughter, music, and life again. Still, Thomas worried. He didn't want to impose or seem like he expected anything from her. But Emily assured him she wanted to stay, just until she got back on her feet. Then came the day everything changed again. Thomas's boss called him into the garage office. Business had slowed down, and they were cutting hours. Thomas's income was already stretched thin, and the thought of losing even a single shift sent panic coursing through him. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, while Emily made tea. She could see the weight he carried, and she decided to do something about it. The next morning, she surprised him. "I've been working on something," she said, handing him her tablet. On the screen were colorful digital illustrations, one of a little girl holding a wrench, another of a father smiling proudly beside her. "I made a children's book," she said softly, "inspired by you and Lily. It's about a girl who fixes cars with her dad. I called it The Little Mechanic." Thomas was speechless. She told him she'd submitted it to a small publishing house online, just to see if anyone would be interested. Weeks later, an email arrived. They wanted to publish it. Not only that, but they wanted her to illustrate more books in the same series. Emily's life changed almost overnight. She finally moved into her own apartment, but she was never far from Thomas and Lily. They'd become her family, in every sense of the word. A year later, the first book was released. It became an unexpected success, especially among single parents and their children. At the launch event, Thomas stood quietly at the back of the room, holding Lily's hand, pride swelling in his chest. When Emily took the stage to speak, her voice trembled with emotion. "This book," she said, looking straight at him, "exists because of a man who stopped to help a stranger in the rain. A man who reminded me that kindness still exists, and that sometimes, family isn't just the people you're born with, but the ones you find when you least expect it." Afterward, she found him in the crowd. Without a word, she hugged him tightly, like someone who finally found home. Months later, they decided to make it official. Emily and Thomas didn't fall in love fast. They grew into it slowly, through shared struggles and quiet moments. Lily called her mom one morning at breakfast, and Emily couldn't stop crying for hours. The house was no longer quiet, no longer cold. It was filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings.